to the 2019 Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Financial Inclusion Survey, there are still 51.2 million Filipinos that are unbanked, while a great majority of the population still prefers going to brick-and-mortar bank branches. Cash was once king for us Filipinos pre-pandemic, but we have to evolve and adapt during this short span of time, which now puts more dependence on connectivity and security. Here to share with us his insights as well as the current trends in the e-banking industry, please welcome PLDT Enterprises' first Vice President and Head of Enterprise Core Business Solutions, Mr. Jojo Hendrano.
Thank you very much, Danny, and a very pleasant good afternoon to our Tech Talk viewers. Please allow me to share with you PLDT Enterprises' perspectives on e-banking. Every industry that you have and will hear here at Tech Talk will have their own pivot stories. Each story is unique, but all equally interesting. The profound part of the banking industry pivot to me is essentially in the past, when I would think about going to a bank, is I would really have to go to a bank. There's actually one here at my condo, but has been closed since we emerged from MECQ. But now when I think about going to a bank, it's about opening my smartphone. And doing such has opened the doors to transactions that I do so much more of now than before. Sending money, paying for something I purchased online, paying for my family's insurance policy, and even sending loan, and even giving Sunday church donations. I used to go to an ATM every 3 days, and now it's every 3 weeks. While the negative economic effects of the pandemic directly impacts this industry, much has been said about our latest GDP figures. A lot of branches also remain closed, banks announcing lower net earnings and bad loans at a 6-year high. Though not as bad as during the Asian financial crisis of 1997, particularly due to intervening measures made by both public and private sectors. It would be noteworthy to mention how well this industry has weathered the crisis, quickly pivoting to bring their digital channels up to scale. The emerging presence also of purely digital players have helped satisfy the much-needed transaction demand. The BSP had also put intervention measures in place to help facilitate digital transfers and other related transactions. Electronic banking and other forms of digital transactions have now become a necessity rather than a choice. According to We Are Social's latest July report, the global COVID time increase of banking-related transactions, digital transactions, is at 26%. Compare that to here, where we are seeing much higher numbers. Boss Doy Vea over at Paymaya recently mentioned that Paymaya app volume grew more than 2.5 times, bills payment more than 3 times, government transactions more than 10 times, while other Philippine financial institutions similarly reporting breakthrough volumes on their digital channels, while brick-and-mortar ATM transaction volumes are down about 25%. Studies also showed that there is much more room to grow. According to the latest Global Web Index report, the Philippines is above the global average when it comes to digitally transferring money to family and friends, but are below the global curve when it comes to using mobile payment services. PLDT and Smart are fully committed to support the banking industry, and we believe that we play a key role in sustaining the all-time high digital footprint of this industry. And we have accepted this challenge, and while much work is still needed to be done, we commend the efforts of our teams that have sustained, if not improved, our industry-leading network quality, even with the sudden 30% increase in network traffic. Network upkeep and expansion continues even with the constraints of GCQ and ECQ, while needing to guarantee the safety of our frontliners and also our customers. It's interesting to note that with the higher digital footprint has brought with it also an escalation in cybersecurity attacks. Our Security Operations Center has helped avert 450,000 attacks, 11 times compared to last year. And we've also blocked 38 billion malicious website access, up 16 times from the previous year. Moving forward, to sustain and improve a financial company's capability to meet, sustain, and elevate the e-banking experience, we note 2 key areas of focus as we scope solutions that we believe can make the most impact. The first area revolves around needing to provide the best possible user experience, which then puts focus on channels and front ends. Beyond the app, it is also important to note how to digitally engage via service channels, email, social media, and the proper use of rich media like video, which has seen the most growth, not just for internal collaboration, but also for interacting with customers. The second area then relates to the systems and operations needed to support all of these transactions. It is imperative that these systems are made resilient and capable to handle the current and future demands, which will continue to increase. Zeroing in on the front-end user experience, it all starts with the main channel of focus, which will be the bank's application or website. We have helped a multitude of institutions on designing the best network to support and optimize the flow of data from customers engaged in an e-banking transactions. It doesn't stop there. We have practices also in EPLDT to help tie your systems together, specifically on Salesforce.com, Microsoft, or SAP solution stacks. Next is on cybersecurity. The increase in the digital footprint of a bank has also increased the threat vectors. Particularly vulnerable are the customers themselves, who continue to be targeted by phishing attacks and other forms of social engineering. Banks are vigilant in informing, educating, and protecting their customers, and our mature and robust cybersecurity practice at EPLDT can also help here. Our promise is to be as, if not more, vigilant in protecting your customers. The last UX element is the evolving and increasing use of video to interact and service a bank's customers. According to the same VR Social report referenced earlier, the Philippines ranks second globally next to India as wanting to use video conferencing more frequently, even after the outbreak ends. This should not be ignored as a medium for customer interaction, and we can help, given our rich solution partners, and can design the best fit platform for your business, be it cloud, on-premise, or hybrid. Next major area, it's also critical to sustain these efforts via resilient systems and operations. Every major financial institution is looking into SD-WAN to transform and unlock new areas of performance, control, and reliability, not just for branch to HQ, but also to the cloud. MPLS performs so much better when bonded with SD-WAN, and with the addition of wireless secondary links, is easier than ever before. The pandemic has also created the need to support highly distributed and mobile workforces to maintain a bank's operations. Beyond connectivity is key here, enabling elevated collaboration, using systems that extend the corporate LAN all the way to the home, and again, ensuring that they remain secure. Lastly, but as important, is we invest to be the premier provider of data center, cloud, and disaster recovery solutions and services that give our customer the best flexibility and agility in deploying and designing future-proof systems. Allow me to then end by summarizing that PLDT Enterprise is uniquely positioned as an integrated provider that you can trust. We recognize and support the heightened role of the banks as a necessary agent to kickstart the economy, and hence committed to the success of this industry. At the end of the day, our ultimate measure is our vision, which is to make a positive impact on every single customer. And now, here to talk about the future of banking in the Philippines, former Chief Executive Officer of the Philippine Stock Exchange and the current Country Manager of ING Philippines, where his team is pioneering cashless payments for the country, Mr. Hans Sikat.
The COVID pandemic, in one sense, has accelerated the digital transformation of the local banking landscape. Not that it hasn't been moving in that direction, but I think it made it extremely clear that the winners of tomorrow are going to be those in the financial service industry that actually have a digital interface and perhaps a more digital platform where they can operate in. For many people in the Philippines, this basically just made it more important that we're able to actually interact in a more digital manner. We're really part of a whole digital ecosystem. What most people don't necessarily see are what's behind this, the corporate activities that go on. Today, the environment is primarily work from home or work from a remote location. And what does that mean? That means that there's a higher requirement for broadband and Wi-Fi connectivity. Because of this happening on the corporate side, you'll see higher demand for server data, which basically requires a lot of data center applications, and also BCPs, business continuity programs. And for us as a bank right now, the hiring is not trying to hire bankers as in marketing guys or finance guys. We're hiring more engineers. It means you're actually acting as an IT company. You're not necessarily acting in the old manner of being a bank or a brick and mortar operation that you just change the front end to digital. Customers want something that's simple, want something that's intuitive, and want something that works 24/7 no matter what. I think that more and more, a lot of the individual transactions will move on your mobile phone. We view ourselves not just as providers, but part of the ecosystem with PLDT and the PLDT group. They're not only providing us a service, but they're also a partner and a client. And in this whole ecosystem, as we take a look and work with PayMaya and how some of these items can actually be perhaps linked to our own digital platform. We do hope that this kind of ecosystem is something where we can continue to not just provide services to one another and to our own client bases, but also to help grow the Philippine economy as we're doing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hendrano and Mr. Sikat. Cashless is truly the new king, and banks are now branchless, with ING Philippines pioneering branchless banking here in the Philippines. Now, we also have with us a special guest this afternoon. He is the Regional Manager for SD1, covering the Asia-Pacific, Japan, and China territory. He has held positions with SEV1, where he was the General Manager, APJ, in charge of a team covering 23 people and covering all marketing, sales, channel, and business development efforts. Now, prior to SEV1, he was the Vice President for Asia-Pacific at Extra Hop Networks, where he successfully defined and implemented the go-to-market strategy for the entire Asia-Pacific region, growing the team from 1 to 14 employees with $7 million in bookings in the second year. Let's all welcome Danny Smulders. Hi, Danny, and thank you so much for joining us all the way from Singapore.
Thanks for having me, Danny, and quite the intro, so thank you so much for that. So today, I'd like to talk a couple of minutes about really how COVID-19 and a global pandemic has been transformational, not only for the banking vertical, but pretty much every vertical that we've seen around. Now, if we look at specifically what it's done for banking or e-banking, you know, you just mentioned e-payments or contactless payments are king. Well, I would even go further, right? It's king, queen, and the whole royal family. And with that comes, you know, big demands on scale infrastructure. You know, can banks, build up this infrastructure themselves, or do they think about pushing things into clouds, be it public cloud or private clouds? A second thing that we've seen in our interactions with CXOs at large banks across Asia is that they've really started to realize that the digital branch now becomes the number one branch in terms of importance, but also in terms of customer interaction. And that interaction has completely changed in a sense that we now see video being used as a medium to interact with customers. We even saw some of the other banks move their call center agents to work from home. Mm-hmm. And a third major trend that we've seen is that some of these banks, let's say in more cash-reliant economies or countries such as the Philippines, but also Thailand, had to reimagine banking in a sense, you know, how do you get a bank physically to your customer rather than the other way around? So we've seen things like mobile ATMs and what have you. Now, some of the major points that we've seen being brought up as challenges by CXOs and particularly in ASEAN is, you know, as soon as you think scale, as soon as you think cloud, there are regulatory things that may stand in the way of doing that. That is usually the number one that comes up. We've seen countries such as Thailand accelerate that, move into the correct regulatory direction. But secondly, that always comes up, and I particularly get this in the Philippines, is, you know, how do we keep things secure? right? Because if you're rolling out, say, call center agents working from home,
Right.
those are potential attack vectors and therefore needs more security. And then the last one is, how do you do that with consistent user or customer experience? Ourselves, we had to reinvent how we do business with our customers and our partners. And so at Cisco, we really had to learn how to, eat our own dog food, if I can use that expression. Very early on, we noticed that this was going to be global and it wasn't going to go away anytime soon. So we already put in policies and adopted technology really early on. And then last, I sort of hinted it before, how do we see digital transformation take shape in the next couple of years? Customer interaction has changed forever. That's number one. Secondly, e-payments absolutely on the rise, and we'll probably see a couple of new entrants in that area. And I think, what pertains to Cisco, regardless of what that future brings, it will be about connecting people to things or applications. We just have to make sure that happens seamlessly, happens secure, and happens consistently.
Danny, you mentioned, off air that there has been differing rates of adoption when we talk about differing countries and landscapes in terms of digitization, especially in banking. We all want more digital transactions. But the thing is, in the Philippines, it's been highlighted as one of the laggards when it comes to digital banking. What were the key, bottlenecks? What are the stress points that you can highlight compared to the best practices that we've seen in other countries in the region? And have these pain points been addressed, so to speak, during this pandemic? Is there an accelerating shift towards now moving and catching up with the rest of the region?
There is, and I wouldn't necessarily say catching up. There are other countries that are, slower to adopt digital transformation. I brought up the example of Thailand earlier. What COVID-19 really has done is validate that adoption is possible, right? We had companies be hesitant, do we need this? Everything's working fine. So the pandemic really has confirmed that it is possible. I would say the number one stumbling block for most countries in a very regulated industry such as banking/e-banking is the regulatory framework, right? And that is something that needs to be put in place. And it's, frankly speaking, something that's beyond all of our control. What we can do, however, one of the things to be compliant with whatever framework is being put in place is security. And so a lot of the things that we roll out have security first in mind in terms of rolling that out. So the example I gave you of a mobile ATM, how do we make sure that connection between that mobile ATM towards the data center happens in a secure fashion and in a consistent fashion so that, it isn't spotty in terms of customer experience. So security first, regulatory framework, absolutely required.
And just moving on from that point and jumping off of that point, you mentioned, IT security and the risks of cybersecurity. That has already been a huge pain point even before the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a huge amount of capex for these banks to even make sure that their normal daily transactions are free of these risks. Right now, the risks are higher than ever, particularly with banking employees working from home. How can this be mitigated? And did we have, not just the know-how, but the tools in place? Is this the technology in place to address these over risks, let's say, risks above and beyond the normal banking risks that we have already faced?
I think the technology was there. It just wasn't built to scale to have, 80 or 100% of your employees working from home. And something that a lot of people tend to gloss over is when you're talking about digital transformation, people tend to think front of the house, customer facing, but very often forget back of the house, where your employees are your internal customers. So we've always had home working, right? That isn't new. What is new is to do it at a scale that we're doing it where 80 to 100% of people are working at home. And that brings a few challenges, right? First of all, you need reliable connectivity, and obviously the likes of PLDT bring that to the market. But secondly is, how do you make sure that all of these endpoints, right, hundreds if not thousands of people working from home are working in a secure way? That's where technologies such as secure SD-WAN with zero-touch provisioning and what we like to call a zero-trust security approach, that makes all the difference. Zero trust, really in a nutshell, is nothing is supposed to happen unless you allow it. And that's very different from a traditional security approach where everything is allowed except if it breaks a rule. So it's really a shift of philosophy, if you will.
Okay, and finally, last question before I let you go. What is the near-term future, at least, going to be looking like now? Right now, as you mentioned, 70%, 80% are working from home. We have readjusted the ways we purchase things via our mobile phones. But is this way of banking and technology and how these are intertwined really sustainable in the long term? Or is this more a temporary Band-Aid solution that we need to have once in a while when alternative solutions are needed? What is the future going to be looking like? Will it be more hybrid? Will it be completely digitized? As you mentioned, will physical branches just be disappearing and everyone moving into the cashless society?
Well, it is not a temporary thing. That's the part of your question I can answer right away. I hope that we don't get a global pandemic every year, but there are such things as natural disasters, and I don't have to tell you in the Philippines what that means. Right. That occur much more frequently, and therefore the need for that digital branch to be available is absolutely there, and it's not going to go away. Now, the pace at which this happens and whether it's going to go to a full-blown 100% digital branch, I think that really depends on how fast countries can adopt that regulatory framework. But also, it is a cultural thing. And it will take longer in certain countries. You think, you use the example Singapore, contactless payments here are it's daily bread, right? I don't know anything else. That may be less so thinking about Thailand and or the Philippines. So the rate at which people are going to adopt to it really comes down to networking, right? But also the availability and the prevalence of things like social networks and mobile phones that are capable of doing that. I see a future where everybody has a smartphone and everybody's on a social network, regardless which one it is. And I really see these guys, enter as new entrants into what's going to be a very burgeoning e-payments, contactless payments world.
Okay, so regulatory frameworks, culture needs to play an issue here, but we cannot avoid the future that is already actually here today. Thank you so much for those insights, Danny Smulders.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for those insights. I'd also like to hear once again from Mr. Jojo Hendrano of PLDT Enterprise.
Thank you, Danny. I hope you've been able to provide our viewers sufficient insight into e-banking. We're proud to get the support and the pleasure in collaborating with our customers. Thank you, Sir Hans. And with our partners, thank you, Danny Smulders. For most institutions, systems were already in place, but no one could have predicted the digital scale needed to support the new normal. It will be imperative for such collaboration to continue between the industry and with service and technology providers, and we're committed to make this industry succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jojo Hendrano, for those insights.